Hey family, this is Jonathan Soul. Stand by, let me power up this engine right quick. See, what you gotta understand is space is black. It's black, it's vast, and it's full of life. Here on jonathansoul.com, what we do is we explore blackness in the form of comics, sci-fi, mystery thrillers, science fiction and fantasy, basically. I interview writers, illustrators, publishers, actors, filmmakers from the African American, the global black community, and see what kinds of dimensions, worlds, civilizations they're building. So put your seatbelt on, engage your gravity boots, make sure there's an airtight seal on your suit. And let's ride in 3, in 2, in 1. I have the opportunity to bring before you a philosopher, somebody who has peeped beyond the veil and brought back not only stone tablets, but some ebooks as well. I'm talking about somebody who's communicated with the force inside the burning bush. And family, not only does he have books of science fiction to share, but also divine lines of poetry. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gerald Coleman. How you doing, sir?
Hey, man, I'm trying to look around to see who is this brother is introducing to make sure that I'm at the right place.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I interview
Good
legends
evening, man.
On this program, brother. Legends before y'all knew it.
I hear you. Well, look, man, it's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to the convo, man.
Yeah, so let's continue what we were talking about. We're going to get into the novel series that you have out on Amazon right now. The first one, I think I have it on my little phone here. When Night Falls, the first book of the 3 Gifts series, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to be three, and you got 2 books out. You got one called When the Night Falls, book 1 of the 3 Gifts, and then the second one, of course, is a Plague of Shadows, book 2. And
correct.
The third book is coming out next year, early next year, end of this year. What happened?
Yeah, well, look, let me correct one thing first, because I get this all the time, but it's probably going to be I hate to say place a number on it, but I know that people are often interested, but it's probably going to be what's called a pentalogy, which is 5 books in the series.
Okay.
And just kind of given where I know the story needs to go.
Uh-huh.
But yes, definitely I'm looking at some point around next summer for book 3 to be finished.
Okay, next summer.
And out and available.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's something in the works, man. Definitely.
Beautiful. Now, you're a writer, you're a poet, and one thing you said off mic, which was profound, was that you need a community, a collective of writers, to build with. And so you referred me to this Facebook public group called the State of Black Science Fiction. Can you tell me something about it?
Yeah, it was a group on. You can find them on Facebook or find us on Facebook. But the kind of inception of it was recognizing a kind of a dearth in the availability of a community where African Americans in particular, but people of color in general, could go and find a community that was interested in the genre.
Mm-hmm.
One of the kind of, I think, myths of the genre among kind of the broader publishing community was always that African Americans in specific and people of color in general weren't interested in science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
That was never my experience. I knew all kinds of people of color and particularly Black folk who were interested in the genre. I began reading it as a kid, very early on, and so these brothers, Milton Davis was one, Balagon O.J. Tade is another, who have had the same kind of experience, and there was no viable community out there for people who were interested in the genre to be a part of, and so they started it themselves, which is something that you have to do. If you see something, if you see a void out there, something you're interested in, oftentimes what we do is sit around and, well, what some people do is sit around and lament that it's not there or complain and fuss about it. But what you have to do is you have to, if it's not there, you have to create it.
Right.
No one else is going to do it for you. And
Mm-hmm.
so these brothers created this community, and it's been growing exponentially. And it's a place where you can go and find, the latest, hottest stuff that folks are writing and producing and creating, not just in terms of novels, but, whatever you're looking for. There are filmmakers, there are artists, there are all kinds of creators involved in the community. And I think that's vitally important. You
now, has this group
silo yourself off.
Has this group ever had like a convention, a con, a gathering?
Yeah, exactly. In 2016, we had our first convention, kind of like a Comic-Con kind of experience. It was called State of Black Science Fiction Con, and it took place here in Atlanta. And it was a rousing success. I mean, it was I've been to a number of conventions. I've been on panels, done the whole thing, but it was one of the most comfortable experiences I've had, because it felt like you were at home at a family reunion.
Wow.
It was Black folk. There were Black folks everywhere, and all kinds of vendors and panels where we talked about what we felt was important to discuss
Mm-hmm.
in the genre of science fiction and fantasy. It was a big deal. We're doing it again this summer at Georgia Tech in the month of June. It's going to be called Black Plasticon. And it's going to be a blast.
Wow. So for people who want to find out more information, they just hop on Facebook and just search for the State of Black Science Fiction. Science fiction, two
Correct.
words. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
And I think the brothers are going to have a website specifically dedicated to the convention up sometime in the coming few weeks.
Fantastic.
But yes, certainly if they go on Facebook and look up State of Black Science Fiction, they'll find all the information they need.
Fantastic. Now, let's get back to your property. So you started out as a novelist?
In terms of writing, my initial experience was as a poet. I started writing poetry in high school.
Okay.
I wrote all through college.
What was the name? What was the name, Gerald?
Well, in college, what we did was
you say you started writing poetry in high school. I figured name was, Rebecca or, Toya, Renee or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sci was her name.
Okay.
That was one of them. You already know. If a brother's writing poetry in high school, there's a woman in there somewhere involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, man. And so by the time I got to college, though, when I went to the University of Kentucky as a freshman, I actually found some other folk who were writing poetry, and incidentally, that was also the time when I first read at 18. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Okay.
And that led me to W.E.B. Du Bois, which led me to Frederick Douglass, which led me to Sheikh Anta Diop, which led me to Martin Bernal, and on and on and on. And so the kind of the impetus for writing changed from what I was doing in high school.
Now, Gerald,
to something a bit more important.
Those books that you mentioned, I mean, that's a journey that a lot of us took. I mean,
right.
Did you was there a different Gerald that came out the other end of that journey? You follow me?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I mean, I don't think you can at 18 as a young black cat, read the autobiography of Malcolm X and come out the same person on the other end of that.
Yeah.
Even before you got to all of those other writers and thinkers, just the experience of that book and the journey that Haley takes you on through Malcolm's own words. That journey is just impactful. I don't see how you could read that and still be the same person, particularly if you are a person of African descent. I don't know how you could do it, but but you're right. I know I'm not the only one who made that journey, but for me, that was the impetus of it. And at 18, and so once I read that, I was hungry for what other black thinkers were out there and what else was available, and so I began kind of reading all of that stuff. And
now, during this period of time,
impacted my poetry.
There you go. Go ahead, keep going. That's just where I was going to go. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that was the arc that kind of moved my poetry from what it was in high school to what it eventually became. You know, with all of those, you know, once you start reading the Souls of Black Folk and Black Athena and the African Origin of Civilization, all that other stuff. Yeah. The philosophy of Alain Locke. You know, you can't help but have that transform your thinking. And so my poetry very quickly moved from, you know, writing love poems to girls in high school to writing about my experience as a young black man and our experience as black folk in this country. And so that was the kind of transformative linchpin of what my poetry became.
Now, you went to University of Kentucky. Is that, I don't think that's the HBCU, is it?
No, that's the big state school in Lexington, Kentucky. The University of Kentucky Wildcats, big blue nation.
All right. So what was it like being a African-American, a student at the University of Kentucky during the period in which you went?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey, man, because I look back on it now and I think I wonder what my experience would have been if I could have been some of these other students who all they have to think about is going to class. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But for us, when we go to universities, particularly if we go to a predominantly white university, there are always these other obstacles or other kind of experiences that we have to deal with at the same time that we have to deal with class. We have to deal with going to class, certainly, but there were always these other battles that we had to fight. Right. In terms of being accepted, in terms of being treated equally, and we were always, you know, through the Black Student Union or through our various fraternities or sororities, we always having to protest this or fight that. Or, you know, push for every little inch we could get in order just to have a safe and comfortable environment in which to grow intellectually. So, did y'all have a black dorm? No, we didn't have a black dorm, but we had what was called the Martin Luther King Jr. Cultural Center, and it opened up right after I got there as a freshman. I think it opened in my first semester as a sophomore, but it became the kind of hub for our university life. You know, we were always there. It was a nice space where you could come and meet other black students. Folks were eating lunch there, doing their homework there. It was a place where you could go and find resources. It was very important that it was the place where incoming freshmen or undergraduates could find upperclassmen who could help them navigate, you know, the various obstacles that they might encounter at the University of Kentucky. I mean, I can't think of how many times as a junior or senior I was there and some hapless lost freshman wandered in with some problem that we had to, okay, look, no, take a deep breath. It's going to be fine. Have a seat. Now, here's what you do. Go over to Funkhauser in room 223. You ask for so-and-so. You get this form. You take that form over to past an office tower. Turn in. It's X, Y, Z. And so, yeah, it became kind of a central hub for the community. Helped kind of, and there was also cultural programming that the Cultural Center did throughout the year, which is kind of the only way we could kind of get the kinds of things on campus that we wanted to have in terms of speakers and concerts and other kinds of opportunities to participate in campus life. So now, that really became kind of center of our lives.
Now, was there a particular faculty member or a member of the administrative that was like an oasis, a go-to, that person that everybody kind of looked to for solace? Did you have a person like that on your campus?
Well, we had, for us, it was very often graduate students, which was interesting because you would have African-American graduate students who were teaching undergraduate courses while they were trying to do their graduate work. Very often, very often they were some of the people that undergraduates would go to. Okay. There was also the director of the Cultural Center who was, while I was there, was my brother Frank X. Walker, who incidentally is also a member of the Appalachian Poets and was the poet laureate for Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And so he did a lot of, he was that kind of resource as well. For me, there was a wonderful sister who was kind of like a grandmother, but her name was Dr. Doris Wilkinson. And he was always one of those who would see me on campus and always had that word to kind of encourage you,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, you can do this, you can keep going, and this is what you need to do. Even if you need to go somewhere else to finish doing it, if this environment is too toxic, don't worry about that. Go do that. And as long as you're taking care of yourself, matriculating and doing what you need to do. Yeah. So there were those persons who were there.
It's beautiful. That is such a part of the. That is such a part of the black. That is such a part of the black college experience that you will never find in a book. Never.
Right.
As well as this. Now tell me if you guys did this on your campus. If you was walking across campus and you seen another black student like a half a mile away, what would you do over there?
Heads up, bro. You get that nod. You get that nod, bro. Come on now.
Oh boy, that dude could be a speck on the horizon if it was a black speck.
Come on now. Come on now. You get that nod. Like, okay, you good? You get that, you good? Yeah, I'm good. All right.
That's it. That's it. Beautiful.
That's that high side. Like, okay, man. Good. Yes, all good. All right.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful.
If we didn't look out for each other, who else is going to look out for us?
Exactly.
And for us, the other interesting piece was, and I don't know if you had this experience, but in the cafeterias and all that, there was mostly black women back there doing all the cooking and fixing and that. They were mama for everybody. They would look out for us.
That's beautiful. Now, here, white folks back there.
Are you eating? That whole nine. But yeah, that's just, how we do. We create a support system wherever we are.
Isn't that beautiful?
To help us kind of, get to where we need to go. So, man, you taking me back, man. You got some memories now.
Because that's so important to the acculturation of a African American adult. You know what I mean? Because when we travel away from that school experience, we kind of look, if we don't go back home, like I didn't go back home, I went straight to another city. We kind of look for that vibration, you know what I mean? Kind of a thing. Now, speaking of community, you're a poet and I'm going to tease you a little bit. I got an album from the Watts Poets. I got another album of the Last Poets. But I don't have. Can I get an album of the Afro-Latin Poets Collective? Y'all, when y'all 12-inch coming out? When y'all LP coming out, man? Come on. Tell us about the Afro-Latin Poets Collective.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're gonna make me get on to our group page
All
and
right.
say, yo, we need an album because
You
we
got to
got
do
a
it,
couple of
man. Vinyl is
anthologies.
coming back. Shit.
Yeah. We got a
Yeah.
couple of anthologies, but we don't have a spoken word album that you can get. I think that's an idea that we need to kick around.
Yeah.
Definitely. But
Shit, it
yeah,
won't
man,
cost you a
that's
thing,
a writing
man.
group that's been a real blessing for me as a writer and for other younger writers coming up as we try to create that kind of community where writers can be nurtured and can be mentored and can find a place where they can go and share their work where they don't feel like they're the only person out there doing it,
Right.
because that can happen to us sometimes as black folk that when we're doing something, for example, science fiction and fantasy, it can be sometimes easy for you to think, am I the only black person out here, trying to write science fiction and fantasy because of the challenges of the publishing landscape
Yeah.
and so we have to have those kinds of communities where our young folk can go and see, no, I'm not the only person, and here's the history of our folk in this genre or in this medium or in this artistic endeavor, and that there are traditions. There are traditions in black poetry that go back. There are traditions in black philosophy. There are traditions in black writing of fiction and of science fiction and fantasy. And sometimes because the predominant culture is not going to teach us about ourselves, we have to have those opportunities where we can learn about ourselves. Because folks will know about the author of the Conan novels, but they won't know about Charles Saunders,
Right.
who wrote Imaru, who was a kind of black Conan character.
Yep.
Folks will know about Heinlein and these other science fiction writers, but they won't know about Samuel Delany, a black writer who was writing science fiction back in the day. And so one of the roles that these kinds of groups like the Affrilachian Poets play in whatever genre or artistic space we find ourselves in is to teach us about our history in those spaces so that we know we're not the first and the only, and we're not by ourselves, and there's a whole tradition of our folk, doing this kind of art and artistic endeavor so that we know that we're not, floating out here in space by ourselves. And so, yeah, that's one of the things the Affrilachian Poets did for us, because there were no other groups for us, so we had to create our own group so that we would have that sense of community, and we would get together on Monday nights in the Martin Luther King Jr. Cultural Center on campus, and we'd bring our little poetry, and we'd bring copies, and we'd pass it around, and we'd all go around and each read our poem and listen to critique from our fellow members and talk about finding our voice and talk about, the content of this poem and how this word on this line might be better if you use this one. That opportunity to kind of find your voice, learn your craft, grow in that artistic endeavor so that when you were out in the public, you could stand on solid feet and say, yes, I am a poet, or yes, I am a novelist, or yes, I am a singer, or whatever artistic endeavor it is that you were trying to, find some sense of ground in. And so that's what I think is best about these communities that we create for ourselves, and that how important it is to find one wherever you are and whatever it is you're doing. Find a community of folk, like-minded folk who look like you, who have that same history and that same perspective, so that you're not by yourself.
Now, do you guys have like a web page or something?
Yes. You can find us at theaffrilachianpoets.org. Or if you just type in The Affrilachian Poets in Google, it'll all come up.
Okay.
That's one of the wonderful things that we didn't have back at the university. Back in the day, you had to go to the card catalog, but they don't know anything about
They don't
that
know
now.
about the card catalog, man.
They don't know nothing about the card catalog, man.
Yeah. And I'm on your page right now. The Affrilachian, so that's Africa and Appalachian, so AFFRILACHIAN poets.com.
Correct.
And look like you guys got about 20, almost 30 people on your page, man. Let's see, Frank X. Walker from Kentucky, Nikki Finney from Kentucky, looks like here. Oh, you got a lot. You got some professors up in here, man. You got published authors, everything. All right.
Book award winners, the whole nine. Yeah, we've been doing it for 25 years. So folk are doing some really productive and powerful work, and so it's gratifying to be part of that.
Beautiful. So now we what are we, like 20 minutes into the conversation, so we have a fuller, understanding of Gerald Coleman. So now let's talk about the novels. The first one, The Night Falls, right? Let me see here. The Night Falls here. When Night Falls, book 1. So it looks like it's gonna be like one of those hero journey kind of a thing with the bad folks coming. Like, kind of give us a kind of sense of the plot.
Right. And my one line sale, they always tell you have
the elevator pitch. Yeah,
and I usually tell folks if I'm at a con or somewhere and they come over to the table to check the books out, I generally tell folks it's the Black Panther meets the Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
That's my one sentence.
The Black Panther meets the Lord of the Rings. Okay.
Pitch. Yeah. And so if you're into swords and magic and all of that, that's what the series is about. But it's written with us as the heroes and the central characters, which you don't often find. I read all of that growing up. The Lord of the Rings and the Wheel of Time and the Faded Sun series and the Black Company and stuff about Dritz Duorden and Elric of Melniboné. The Dragon Riders of Pern. That was what I was reading. I was reading nothing but science fiction and fantasy. But what was missing was me.
Right.
There weren't any characters in any of those adventures who looked like me that I could kind of, relate to or center myself in the story. There was always an extra step that I had to take to empathize with the hero, because the hero didn't look like me.
Exactly.
And so when I finally sat down to write this series, because I always, even when I was writing just poetry, I always knew that at some point I wanted to write science fiction and fantasy. It's a genre I've grown up reading. It's a genre I love. It's a genre that's been so entertaining to me over the years. And what I wanted to do was to create something that I didn't have. I wanted, Black folk to be able to go to the science fiction and fantasy section and find what I never could find when I was a kid and growing up. And to see the book that I wanted to write the series that I wanted to read when I was 18, or when I was 15, or when I was 25. And so that was the kind of genesis of the series. And so When Night Falls is that kind of classic hero tale about the warrior who is going to have to face the great evil that is attempting to subvert and conquer the world. But the difference is that the characters, now it's a diverse cast of characters. I mean, you're gonna find a little bit of everybody in there, but the heroes, the protagonists, are going to be Black folk. And the other thing that I really paid attention to was how I write women in the story.
Okay.
Because very often in this genre, women are treated as two-dimensional characters. They aren't treated as full-fledged human beings. They're often treated as a tool of the male character. You know, the hero's
Okay.
always a male character, and the women often tend to be these two-dimensional characters that are only there to serve the interests of the male character.
Okay.
So for me, I knew that not only did I want to write about black folk as heroes, and my main character is a black male, but I also wanted to write the female characters that existed in the world as fully fledged human beings, and not these two-dimensional characters that didn't really, in my opinion, represent women well. And so you find that there are Asian characters, there are Native characters, there are women, and so there's a very diverse cast of characters. But at the center of all of that is black folk, because I wanted to make sure that that we could finally see ourselves in a genre that we read. You know, it's one of the things you and I discussed earlier, that there has been this assumption in the broader publishing world that black folks don't read or
Gerald,
go
remember we had that
fiction
conversation?
fantasy.
Gerald, remember we had that conversation about euphemisms?
Right.
White publishers don't think black people buy sci-fi. Period.
Right.
That's it. They don't think they at least they didn't back in the day. But now that we have Gerald Coleman in the mix, we got, Milton Davis in the mix. We got all these other people creating content. Once they get a whiff of that buzz, all of a sudden they're going to have a black imprint, which is, I think, what some of these larger publishing houses are doing now. And so, no, white publishers didn't want to put the effort out to have black content for black people. They didn't.
Right.
And so what do? Just like Gerald said, we create our own shit. Go ahead, bro.
Right. No, I was just going to say, if you look at folk like Tor now, seeing what independent writers have been doing, they're now trying to run up and, put out folks in the same genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's only happening because, as you said a moment ago, because we've taken it upon ourselves to do it ourselves, and now that they're starting to see that it's profitable. Now let's go and find some folk to put out, right? But that's only happened because, as you said, we decided, okay, y'all not going to do it, we're going to do it ourselves.
Exactly. Now here's the thing, though. The challenge that from the conversations I've been having with other novelists is that when you're a part of these different houses, there's a firewall of editorial that you got to go through. So I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that an indie black novelist would have, more control and be able to express all the nuances of their characters and their plots than they would in a white concern. Am I off on that, Gerald?
No, and I've had these questions asked by some folk. I've had these questions asked at cons. I've even talked to an editor or two who asked me about publishing with, and the reason I use the term major publishing houses is because what that generally you're talking about are the 5 major publishers that exist. That have, now you have indies, you have small publishers, you have what's called vanity presses, but they're basically the what's called kind of the big 5 publishers that include folk like Tor and Del Rey and et cetera.
Okay.
And so the question is, do you want to be published by one of the big publishers? And my response was always, I didn't try and go that route, because what happens a lot of times with indie writers is they try to go that route, and when it doesn't work, then they fall back to indie publishing. But I never even tried because I didn't want to have those arguments. I didn't want to argue about, as you were saying a moment ago, I didn't want to argue about the story arc for this black character.
Right.
I didn't want to argue about the fact that the main character was a black character.
Right.
Right. I didn't want to argue about putting the black character on the cover. Because these are some of the things that have happened. There have even been times where when, as you were saying about those obstacles, when a black author was being published, they would actually take one of the minor white characters in the story and put that character on the cover instead of the black main character.
Now, this is a story that you heard from other authors?
These are some of the things that predominantly white publishers have done in the past. Okay. And I didn't want to have any of those arguments.
Gotcha.
I didn't want to have an argument about who should go on the cover.
Right.
No, my main black character is going on the cover. That's the whole point behind my writing these books, is to fill the void in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want to have those editorial arguments about, well, why, as you said, well, why wouldn't this character do X instead of Y? Well, because you're bringing your cultural bias to the story.
Right.
And what you think a black character is or isn't capable of. I don't have those hang-ups. And so I don't want to have those. I don't want to have those arguments. I'm going to write the story that I want to write for the audience that I want to write it for. Now, I personally believe that any person who picks up my story will love it.
Okay.
But I also know that I'm writing that story specifically for black readers.
Right.
So I don't feel like the story that I'm writing is a story that excludes anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I know the audience that I'm writing for.
Right.
Why I'm creating the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have white readers, I have black readers, I have Asian readers, I have readers of all backgrounds. But just like, the stories that have been written, like Divergent and The Hunger Games, those are white stories, basically written for a white audience from a white perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have any problem with that. You don't hear any kind of discussion or argument about how that's limiting.
Yep. But
now, if you say here's a black character in a black story written from a black perspective, then all of a sudden you start having these odd conversations about whether or not that's limiting. Well, the white story isn't limiting, so why would my black story be limited?
Exactly.
And so I think you have to understand who you're writing to. But I think a great story, regardless of who the characters are, if you're writing a great story, readers who don't approach it with an inherent bias will enjoy it.
Of course. I mean, I usually use the Black Comedy Club argument. I don't know. I have to use that here, but I mean, you ever watch Kung Fu Action Theater back in the day?
Oh yeah, man! On Sunday afternoon after church,
yeah,
my grandmother would have it. On all day.
Yeah. And so we sat there, we watched it, and then afterwards we go outside and pretend like we're, whoever the characters were and everything.
Right.
And
like we have the Iron Claw, the Drunken Monkey, and you're doing all of that.
And the reason why we enjoyed it was because it was unique, it was well done, and it was steeped in their own cultural myths. It was something different.
Right.
But nobody ever said, well, damn, man, how come there's no white people in Five Deadly Venoms? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Where's the black? Where's the black character? And I don't know, whatever. They had some wild names, man. The monkey, monkey monk or something, or whatever it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? So so that whole idea, that whole conversation that they throw at us is just that colonialism, that racism, that imperial, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? I think the technical term nowadays is just bullshit arguments that they're trying to put on us. But see, the beautiful thing is with the internet and with all this technology, there's no barrier between us and our audience. You follow me? And so, man, I got to tell you, I'm opening up Facebook again. I committed Facebook Harry Carey years ago, but I didn't know that Facebook had, I knew about the Renaissance because I'm out here talking to people, but I didn't know that that Facebook group that you mentioned has such a large following. I mean, I think when I talked to Milton, he told me there were more than 1,000 people that were members of this group. So
It
that's
has, man. It has grown. It has grown exponentially. It's really blown up. And you're correct in that. What technology has done is that technology has leveled the playing field in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, for example, if you look at the sales numbers last year, indie authors were more than half the pie. You know, when you look at the percentage of where people were spending their money on books, indie authors were taking up. It had begun at 5-10%, worked its way up to 30-some%, and now it's up to almost half the pie. So
wow.
that's one of the other reasons that the big publishers are now having to diversify their rosters, because that's what they're seeing. That's what's eating into. You know, you hear this. Excuse me. You hear this. This narrative about book sales going down. No, book sales aren't going down. What's happening is that book sales are being generated in other areas of the industry. Now it's not just, folks aren't just buying from major publishers, they're buying indie publishers. And so since the major publishers aren't getting those dollars, the narrative becomes, oh, well, sales are down. No, sales are fine. Sales are just now diversifying so that people aren't just buying from Tor. People aren't just buying from, the major houses. People are buying books from all of these indie authors and small
serious?
presses. Yeah, man.
So you mean to tell me that if Borders Books was to let the indie people in strong, they'd have still been around? Is that what you're telling me?
Man, still been around. But
amazing.
It's that gatekeeper thing. Their model, for example, and I've said this at cons before. When you look at how the music industry was disrupted by technology, right? You had the major labels now, so that it used to be that in order to get your music out, you had to be signed by a major label.
Right.
That was the only way, right? That's the technology changed all of that and disrupted the industry to the point that Chance the Rapper doesn't even need a deal to make millions of dollars and to make the music that he wants to make. Chance the Rapper had folk coming begging him to sign contracts. He said, "Why? I don't need you to make $20 million. I can do that myself," because technology has arrived at the point where you don't need those gatekeepers to make it happen.
Wow. And
the publishing industry is in the throes of that now, because technology has made it to the degree. For example, 15, 20 years ago, in order for me to do what I've done with my novel, I would have had to had enough capital to buy 50,000 books from a printer, and have them stacked up in my house and my garage and what have you. And then I would have had to go to basically door to door selling, right? Well, with the arrival of print on demand, I don't have to do that. Wow. In other words, my books don't exist anywhere in a warehouse. With print on demand, my book is in the cloud. So when you go on to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Apple iBooks or Kobo or Pounds, wherever you go to buy my book, you click on there, you buy my book, and then the printer prints that copy. The printer doesn't have to. I don't have to have 50,000 copies of the book printed, stored somewhere.
One copy.
Because printing on demand will do it on demand. If 10 people buy my book today, they'll print 10 copies.
Wow.
If 100 people buy my book next week, they'll print 100 copies. If one person buys my book tonight, they'll print one copy. And that's what print on demand did. Print on demand made it possible to do that without the added expenses and having to store stuff and all of that. And then with the onset of ebooks and the digital marketplace, because, let me put it this way. I personally haven't been to a mall for maybe 7 years.
Wow. Okay.
Everything I buy online. I buy shoes, I buy jeans, I buy coats. Whatever it is I'm shopping for that I used to get in my car and drive to a mall and walk into a store to buy, all I do now is open up my iPad and find their website and buy it, and they mail it to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what e-commerce and the technology of e-commerce has done.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the same thing that's happening in publishing is that, when you go to buy my book now, I don't have to have a publisher who has contracts with 3,000 bookstores across the country, and they print 100,000 copies and ship them all out to all of the bookstores, and then people get in their cars and drive to the bookstore and find my book on the bookshelf where my publisher has paid to have it placed, and then buy it. That I don't have to do any of that anymore.
Now let me interject here, man. Let me interject here because
you don't have that problem.
Let me interject because I feel like even though everything you're saying is 110% correct, you never had a daydream of walking into Borders Books and going to the sci-fi section and seeing your novels there, man. You never had that little daydream. Am I the only
10
one?
years ago.
10 years ago? Okay.
10 years ago, definitely, because that's how I used to buy my books,
right?
And that was the only model available. I used to hunt bookstores. You go because they always had our section back in the corner.
Yeah,
right. The sci-fi fantasy section was all because they were, for whatever reason, was embarrassed by the genre, but they would put us back in the corner, right?
Yep.
You had to go walk over back into that corner, and then you scan the bookshelves to see if you can find the latest thing out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I used to buy books too. And so certainly that was a part of the vision, but that was a part of the vision because that was the only sales model we knew.
Yeah.
That was the only sales model that was available to us. And if you think about it, kids growing up now, they don't have that model. Kids growing up now, their model, if they daydreamed about it, their daydream would be to be able to click on Barnes and Noble, and when the web page came up, their book would be on the front in that top little section of new releases. You know what I'm saying? That would be their dream because their model of how they purchased is so different from how we purchased, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
That's true.
And so certainly that's the case. But the other part I think that does bolster what you just said is that the other thing that is happening in publishing that I think is beautiful is independent bookstores are starting to thrive again.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Big chains like Borders has gone, and Barnes and Noble's having their struggles and all of that.
Yeah.
But when you talk about indie bookstores in towns that are locally owned, those are still thriving. Those are still doing well.
Okay.
Because they're finding ways to kind of, and then I think it's also a part of that, that big push has in the last 3 to 5 years of shopping local.
Okay.
Even American Express got in on that. They have a shop local Saturday or whatever that kind of model is. But there are a lot of people who are now really kind of turning back to the local market and away from giant chains in whatever sales space you're talking about, not just clothes, but books. For example, what I always do anytime I've moved to a new city is I find a nice local pizza place. I find a local coffee shop. I find a local dry cleaners. That I'm not looking for Papa John's. I want to know what's the local spot that makes the craziest, best pizza on the planet. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not looking for Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for the local coffee spot. Like Octane or Rev Coffee. I'm looking for the local spot because the local spot, when you spend your dollar at the local spot, it multiplies at a greater rate in the community than spending at some of these major chain spots.
Gotcha.
Now, Starbucks is fine if you're somewhere where you don't know the surroundings and you like, okay, let me see where's the nearest Starbucks. I can go and get a cup of coffee. But in terms of not traveling but living in your own community, what I tend to do is I try to find a local spot. And people are, there's a sister in New York who's opening up a new local bookstore. I think it's in Brooklyn. It's called the Lit Bar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there are more and more people who are opening local independent bookstores, and the other upside of that is it's much easier to get your book in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a local shop in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, called the Wild Fig. And, all it took was a conversation on Facebook Messenger, and I was able to ship my books there, and they're on the shelf now.
Wow.
Milton Davis he just had a big sale with the sister who runs a local bookstore. I think it's in the Bahamas.
Huh.
And he just shipped a whole big shipment down there, and he's been regularly posting, because he posts pictures of folk buying his books, and he posts them on Facebook.
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
It's a locally owned bookstore.
Wow.
And so, I think the industry has gone through a bunch of changes and will continue.
Uh-huh.
But I think that narrative that people aren't buying books, that's not true. Just like the narrative that black folks don't buy books, that's not true. It's just that those spending patterns have changed, and people are buying books in different places now. And Tor is now having to compete with indie folk, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, there's a lot of creators and writers that listen to the show, and so I always kind of like to talk about the mechanics of the craft. Can you tell us about your writing ritual?
Okay. I'm kind of unorthodox, I've gone through, I know that there are folks who write every day. They have a schedule by which they write. They write at a certain time every day. And that's their kind of schedule. For me, I think you do what works, because the same thing that works for one person isn't going to work for another.
Okay.
And if you can only really write at 3 a.m, then do that. If that works for you, whatever it is that allows you to create the greatest story and to do your best writing, I think that's what you should do. I think we need to throw out this idea that there is this kind of standard template that you should use in order to, you should get up every morning at 6 a.m. and write for 2 hours straight, and then, edit for another 3 hours. If that's what works for you, hey, great, do that. That's not what works for me. For me, I do a lot more thinking. For example, when I sit down to write the next book, book 3, I know what the general story is supposed to be. In other words, what I need to accomplish in book 3, so that by the time I get to book 5, the whole story has been met, right? That whole arc has been completed. And so knowing that, then when I sit down, I then break it down to decide, okay, so knowing what I need to accomplish in book 3, what do I need to accomplish in chapter 1? Right. And so then I'll think about that, and then I'll think about all of the intricacies of what needs to go into that. Which characters am I writing about? Where did they leave off? What are the issues that I'm weaving into their story, and how I get them from point A to point B in this particular book? And then I'll sit down and write that chapter. And then once I've written that chapter, I like to sit on it for a few days and then go back to it to make sure that, for me, I think it was Agatha Christie's character, Hercule Poirot.
That's my man. That's my man.
Yeah, he always does this thing where when he gets to a point in the case, he says he lets the gray cells work, right? And what that means is he kind of puts it on the back burner in his mind and lets his subconscious mind work on the problem. And then once it works on the problem, it presents the solution to his conscious mind, and then he can move forward with his investigation of the case. And so for me, I like to do, once I kind of write out the chapter, I like to let my subconscious work on it. And it's amazing once you start to trust yourself as a writer, how your mind will present stuff to you. Man, I've been on the treadmill or in the shower or driving somewhere, and my mind will just drop a piece of the puzzle and say, okay, boom. And the thought occurs, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's what needs to happen next. Let me jot that down so I don't forget it. And then I can go back and weave that into the chapter. And then I can finally get to the editing part. And for me, I know, for example, my good friend Milton, what he likes to do is Milton likes to write his whole book and then go back and edit.
Mm-hmm.
He likes to write out the whole story and then go back to the beginning and then go through and edit the whole thing. And for me, my process is a little different. I like to write a chapter, edit the chapter, put that chapter to bed, and then move to the next chapter, so that by the time I get to the end, I'm finished. I don't have to go back and do anything else. I do it as I go. And so that's just part of my personal process. But
now, in terms of
whatever works for you.
Yeah. In terms of like the other part of it, so after you finish, you at the end of your process, do you do your own editing? You have a team, laying out of the book electronically, cover design. How is that accomplished?
Yeah, I have a couple of beta readers who I allow to read the chapter and send it back just to catch typos and those kinds of things, and then to ask me some questions if something isn't clear, and then that's how I work through the editing process.
Okay.
Once I'm finished, now the map, for example, the map that goes along with the series is a map that I created the map, but then I sent those sketches to an actual cartographer, and they created the map that you see in the book based upon my sketches.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
With the cover happens the same way. I have an artist it's the same artist who's done both books, and I send him a kind of a mock-up that I've done with the kind of pose that I'm looking for, and then give him the information of, okay, is like, for example, in book one, the character is superimposed on a city. So that's basically what I told him I wanted, and then he sends me sketches, and I give the okay, and then he finally finishes it up.
Okay.
And with book two, it was he's in a forest, and he's fighting this creature, and this is what the creature looks like. This is the pose I want, and then he sketches it out, and I say approve the pose and all that, and then he goes about finishing the whole thing, and then we do the lettering. So I try to be very involved in the process at all stages, which is one of the things that you have to do if you're an indie author. You can't do what you can do if you're, for example, a tour, which is you just write the book and send it in.
Yeah.
And they do all of the rest of that. Now they'll send you back galleys and all of that, but in terms of the kind of hands-on stuff that you have to do as an indie, you have to understand and be prepared that that's what a part of the process.
Now, where
like
did
you can't sit back and think that once you put the book out there that there's nothing else to do. As an indie, you have to also understand how to market it. You have to be actively engaged in marketing it.
Right. Before you get to that part, where did you find the map maker and the artist?
The map maker I found on a site for cartographers. You go online and type in cartographer, and the site will come up, and you register on the site, and it's basically a site of artists who create maps.
Wow.
And there's a section for you to commission a map so that and so I went in, I told them what I wanted. I'm a fantasy writer. I'm looking for someone to write a map. To draw a map for me. Mm-hmm. And then I had people who from those artists were able to see that job and bid on it and let me know what they would charge for the kind of map that I wanted. And then I just chose the person that I thought would work well for my project and then went from there.
What about the artists for the cover? Was it the same process?
Yeah, same process. There are several. There's a place called the Art Station. There's a place called Deviant Art, and basically it was just getting out there and looking for artists in the genre, and then seeing the work that they had created to see if it was the kind of style that I wanted for my novels, and then communicating with the person, and then again deciding on what I wanted and figuring a price that we could agree on, and then a process. Okay. think that what's important. I think again, this is where that community piece we've been talking about comes in. Because if you're someone who's just now starting out, you have to be careful, because there are folk out there who will basically steal your money. You send the money and that's to be the last you hear from them. You don't have your artwork.
Yep.
And so one of the ways that you can kind of avoid that is to tap into a community of writers who can point you in the direction of some artists who have a good reputation, who will do the work. I think that's important. Because if you just get out there by yourself, man, it's the wild, wild west out there.
Yeah.
You could get taken real quick from some folk who are unprofessional, who don't really have your best interest at heart, and it's good to be able to have those kinds of references from people who can tell you, yes, this artist will do the work that you need to be done, and do it well, and do it on schedule, and not charge you a house payment.
Right.
I mean, charge you an arm and a leg to get it done. So that's vitally important.
Now, you alluded to marketing. What's your process, your approach to marketing?
Man, marketing is really the last kind of frontier for publishing, and in my estimation, it's the only reason to have a publisher.
Okay.
If you can find a publisher who is really willing to spend the money it takes to properly market your book, then I think signing on is a good idea. Otherwise, you're just paying folks to do nothing. That's something you can do yourself. There's just no reason for it. There's no reason to sign with a publisher to be able to get your book out, because you can do that yourself. You can get as we've just been talking about, you can get a map maker, you can get an editor, you can get a cover artist. You can do all of that without a publisher. So from my perspective, the only reason to really be engaged with a publisher at this stage is if you have someone who's willing to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to market your book out there, and that's really kind of the last kind of frontier for why I would think a publisher is even necessary at this stage, given the technology and what's available. But if you're not doing that, if you're an indie, then you then you really have to kind of learn a lot of the basics of how you take an image of your book or quote unquote an ad and get it before how you get your book in front of the audience that you're looking for. And probably the first thing you need to do is figure out who that audience is. Who are you writing the book for, so that you know who you're trying to reach. And once you do that, then it's a question of, and this other thing I think is very important, is to get the proper materials, get the proper images that will market your book in a positive way. And again, that starts, I think, with the cover of your book, because as cliche as it sounds, people are still to this day judging your book by the cover. If you have a terrible cover, you could be the greatest writer in history, but if you have a terrible cover, people are going to dismiss the book because of the level of the quality. So you really have to have quality images and quality imagery to kind of, get people's attention, so that they look at that and say, oh, wow, that looks great. Now that it's caught my attention, now let me see what it's about.
Gotcha.
Right? So that the first stage is how good it looks. The second stage is how well you've written it. So you've got to, again, that's the basics. You got to write a great book, but you also have to have really beautiful images, not just of your cover, but then of the imagery that you're going to use for marketing. Okay. I just recently stepped my game up at the beginning of this year in terms of purchasing and creating some new marketing images that I think are very eye-catching and very beautiful and look very professional. They look like something that a major publishing house would have put out. And I think that's necessary. And the plus side is that it's easy enough for you to do. There isn't anything that you can't do now as an indie that publishers are doing. You can make your book and your marketing and your advertising look just as good as anything the big publishers are producing.
Okay.
You just have to be willing to kind of do the work. And so you know, finding those beautiful images, creating those beautiful marketing images. Make sure you've got a website. Make sure so that whenever you put something out there, you know, the people have 2 and 3 opportunities to see, you know, to click on something and be immediately taken to somewhere where they can purchase your content.
Okay.
And then it's a question of finding those places to put it. And that's one of the beauties now of social media and the internet, is finding those places. For example, you can take for an example as Facebook, is finding those groups like the State of Black Science Fiction.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of readers. And so as a member of the State of Black Science Fiction, you can go in there and post about your book, and it'll be in front of, you know, all these thousands of readers who will get an opportunity to see it. And then you have your link, you'll click back to the book where they can purchase it. So finding those places on, and then, for example, with Twitter, understanding how you get your book on Twitter in front of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not just about the content, but that's about understanding how hashtags actually work. You know, people throw up all of these hashtags under when they're posting, but it's very important to understand that, for example, if you're advertising a science fiction book, then if you just put hashtag sci-fi under your post, then anybody who goes on the Twitter and looks up sci-fi, your post is going to be in that thread.
Okay.
Right? And so understanding to put hashtag sci-fi, hashtag fantasy, hashtag Afrofuturism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a hashtag for diverse books,
mm-hmm.
because of the push now recently to have more diverse books for our kids.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding how those work and then being able to do that. But it's essentially about knowing who you're pitching your book to,
mm-hmm.
and then figuring out where they are online and then marketing to them.
Gotcha.
And there are, you know, a number of ways to do that.
I just want to say this, Gerald, you've been very gracious with your time. As we close out, I want you to speak to 2 audiences. The first audience is your demographic, your readership. What would you tell them to you know, make them understand how important it is to have your book in their hands?
Okay.
Go ahead, talk to that audience first.
Okay. So for me, I think it's vitally important because not just for my book, but for all of the books that these Black indie writers are producing, because I know how important and impactful reading good books can be.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things that especially Black folks can do for their children is to give them a love of reading. And the way you do that is just basically by reading with your children from the time they're very young.
Mm-hmm.
And that way they connect the emotionality of being in your space with reading. If your child is sitting in your lap while you read to them, then that emotional experience will be grafted onto them and will extend to reading, so that when they read from there on out, they will connect that reading emotionally to being with their mother or being with their father.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that we know from academic studies, is that reading, if your child is able to read and read well, you don't have to worry about all of these other, trying to get them into certain schools, as much as that's important. Certainly that's important, but giving your child a love of reading will, in a lot of ways, make up for other benefits that you may not be able to give them. And it will help them to be able to be successful in not just in school, but in everything they do thereafter.
Beautiful.
And so I think what's important about what we're doing as Black writers of science fiction and fantasy is that we're putting those images in front of them in the same way that that little girls have been impacted positively by being able to go see Wonder Woman. than your child being able to read these stories where people who look like them are the heroes saving the day or saving the world or saving the galaxy, whatever whatever is going on in your particular story in the genre in which you're writing. That makes an impact on them being able to see themselves as the heroes of the story. Beautiful. And so I hope that folks will pick up not only the Three Gifts series, but all of these stories that are being written by Black men and women who are now writing the books that we didn't have available to us as kids when we were readers.
That's true. It's beautiful. And that's powerful, man. You're exactly right about that. It's something special for, a little one to walk up on the bookshelf in their living room and to see all of these, sci-fi books and comics and everything, all by Black people. Right. Because it kind of broadens their horizons. Now, for the creators, for the writers in the audience, you're farther along in the journey than a lot of them are. What advice would you give them to kind of help them on their way?
Wow. Find yourself a community. How many times we said that tonight? But I think it's vitally important. Find yourself a community of like-minded folk. Whatever content you're creating, whatever space, whatever art space you're in, find other folk who are just like you, who are trying to do what you're doing. Because not only is it important to have that community so that you can encourage each other, but it's also important because the folk who are part of my writing community, whenever they have a question, they can, get online or pick up the phone and hit me with a text or a message or a tweet or whatever. Hey, G, what? Like you said, man, I need a map. I need a map for my book. Where do I go? Right. And it's just simple enough for me to point them in the right direction. And so that's one of the important ways that the community of folk in your particular art space is important. Mm-hmm. And then believe in yourself. I mean, how many times have we heard people tell us this? But it's vitally important. Believe in what you're doing, understand why you're doing it, and then keep at it. Keep pushing. And I think here's another important thing that I think is vital, and that is, don't be afraid to get better. I know that sounds odd, but I
you got to go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I particularly want writers, because what we do sometimes is, for example, with the first book, we rewrite it and we rewrite it and we rewrite it and we rewrite it, and it's like, put it out. Do the best work that you can do right now, and then put it out there, knowing that yes, you may get better, but don't be afraid of that. Right. I have no problem reading the person's first book, then buying their second book and say, man, this is even better than the first book. The first book was great, but this one was even better. Okay, it should be that way, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have folk who are waiting to be the greatest in the world, right, before they'll even, put anything out. Don't do that to yourself. Do the best work that you can do right now, knowing that the more you do anything, you're going to get better at it.
Beautiful.
I know with the Wheel of Time, I remember reading the big series by Robert Jordan. It sold, tens of millions of copies. But I know that once I had read book 10 or 11 or something like that, and I went back and read book 1 again, I thought, wow, he got so much better. And by the time he's at book 8 and 9 and 10 than he was at book 1. Wow. And that freed me up by allowing me to understand that, I believe book 1 is really great, but I think book 2 is even better. And that's okay. We can't sit around and wait for that magic moment where we think we're finally the greatest writer in the universe. You got to write where you are. So those are some of the things that I would say to folk. But I think the community piece is vitally important because it's so important because it can help you navigate all those other obstacles and answer a bunch of those questions. Because if you're doing this as an indie artist, there are going to be a million questions you have to get answered. Right. For example, who should I publish the book through? Okay. Should I go with Create Space? Should I go with First Edition Design Publishing? Should I go with Ingram Spark? Should I go with Draft to Digital? There are folks who have had all those experiences who can answer those questions for you, so you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And that's why I think the community piece is so vitally important.
Beautiful. Mr. Gerald Coleman, where can we find you on social media?
Man, you can find me on my website, geraldlcoleman.co. You can find me on Facebook at The Three Gifts. You can find me on Twitter at Iconoclast, and that's spelled ICONICLAST.
Brother, you dropped a lot of knowledge and experience on us, man, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the program.
Man, it's been my pleasure. You took me back down through memory lane, brother, and I appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure, man, sharing this experience with you. And I look forward to not only sharing this with other folk, but continuing to share what you're doing, because I think what you're doing is important, speaking to Black artists and giving folk an opportunity to find those people. Because a lot of times you have folks who are saying, where are all the Black writers? As if we don't exist. You know, where are all the Black filmmakers? Where are all the Black poets? Well, we're out here, but sometimes we need a little help with exposure. And I think what you're doing is so vitally important. And Fantastic. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you tonight.
Yo, family, I hope y'all enjoyed that interview as much as I enjoy bringing it to you. This is Jonathan Soul speaking with you now. Of course, you can go to jonathansoul.com for more episodes. You can subscribe there. You can also subscribe on SoundCloud and iTunes. Follow me on Twitter, JohnAthanSoul, on Instagram. And of course, if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see where I do videos reviewing the comics. The thing about comics is it's not just for collectors or enthusiasts of the art form like myself. It's about getting your kids to read again. You know, C-Tick Run is boring as hell, but when they see Bangs That Pow and they're Black characters, that's a whole world of difference. Also, family, you can support the channel by going to Amazon or my site and picking up my novel, my sci-fi novel, Malcolm Mars. I love you guys. Hope all your dreams come true. See you next Sunday here on Jonathan Soul. Peace.